Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you the news that relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yisrael Hawkins. Well, Italy is reeling from more earthquakes. Swine flu, could that be making a comeback? And more on the crisis in and around the Great River Euphrates in the Middle East, along with the latest moves from all the major players. Well, we're going to start off our report here today with a wake-up call for the average American. Now, before 9/11, the American people were well informed and knew when we were at war. There were commercials for supporting the war efforts and for the troops that were fighting in these wars. But times have changed. In 2016, Americans don't seem to realize that we are involved in waging war in 5 different countries.
Interesting. Well, Iraq and Syria are 2 places America is waging war, and most Americans may believe we are only advising the Iraqi military. However, America is still actively bombing the region. Now, the same holds true in Syria. We are dropping thousands of bombs there, but Americans are told we don't have boots on the ground. Well, in addition to the bombing campaign, we are also dumping weapons all over the area, some of which have fallen into the wrong hands.
Well, Somalia is number 3 on the list. The New York Times recently published an article entitled, "In Somalia, U.S. Escalates a Shadow War." Now, despite the write-up, the war in Somalia is so little spoken of that most people would have a hard time locating Somalia on a map. Even fewer realize that the Obama administration has intensified this war using special operation troops, airstrikes, and private contractors.
Next on the list is Yemen. Saudi Arabia is taking most of the blame for destroying the infrastructure and people of Yemen. However, most Americans have no idea that their government is actively helping Saudi Arabia. Not only has America provided logistical support for Saudi airstrikes, which we've reported has killed numerous civilians in the past, we've reported that, but we've also recently fired cruise missiles at some of the radar installations there.
Well, last and number 5 on the list of countries the U.S. is at war with is Libya. Just recently, the U.S. military launched 30 strikes on one Libyan city in the span of just 3 days. So there we have 5 countries, Iraq, Syria, Somalia, Yemen, and Libya, where America is actively waging war, and very few Americans have any idea.
Wow. So the big question is, why the hush-hush? Could it be that our leaders know our wars are not so valiant? Could it be that if Americans did realize just how much death and destruction our country is causing, they might get upset? Well, whatever the reason might be, our media is keeping it quiet. Americans might not be affected by these wars, but the rest of the world they're not so lucky. So a lot of people here in the United States oblivious to it. But it's definitely right in the face of everyone else.
They're seeing the effects.
That's right.
Well, 2 people in Michigan were diagnosed with influenza A or H3N2 virus after reporting direct contact with swine at a fair. Now, pigs at 2 separate county fairs have tested positive for the same strain of the swine flu H3N2. It is unclear how the pigs got the disease, but it is not surprising to Dr. James Averill with the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development. In an interview with WILX 10 News, he said, "It's not shocking to see that it's the same subtype of H3N2. What we don't know are those 2 pigs associated with one another."
While they are looking for the cause of the illness in the pigs, the Department of Health is working to make sure it doesn't spread. 2 people in Muskegon County in Michigan have already caught the virus from pigs while attending the fair.
Linda Vale of Ingham County Health Department says they are trying to identify anyone who may potentially have the virus so they can keep it from spreading. She told the local news media there's just a lot of monitoring around these flus that are in animals that can occasionally get in humans, just to make sure that we don't start the progression of a human-to-human transmission. So they know they went from animals to humans. Now they don't want it to go human to human.
Right, and these are kind of what they call zoonotic diseases that get from the animals to the humans. Kind of makes you wonder what's in the virus that enables it to break through the barrier of the human immune system. It's kind of interesting. Well, I guess we'll find out. But Dr. Averill says you can't tell just based on signs that they're exhibiting. People should have clinical signs such as influenza-like illnesses. Well, we encourage them to seek medical treatment. And as a precautionary measure, while at the fair, people are not allowed to eat in the barns and are also encouraged to wash their hands frequently.
The pig at the Ingham County Fair that was diagnosed with swine flu did die. However, veterinarians have not confirmed the exact cause of death, and for safety, that part of the exhibit was closed off.
Oh, that's got to be scary for the people who got the flu as well.
That's right, or were at the fair.
Yeah, that's true. Well, pigs aren't the only things you need to be aware of. Frightening images coming from Italy once again. Centuries-old churches crumbled as terrified residents ran into the streets while multiple earthquakes struck just after dark. At least 2 earthquakes rocked the center of the country just 12 miles from the quakes that took place only about 2 months earlier. The 6.2 magnitude earthquake and its aftershocks in August were extremely devastating, killing almost 300 people and leaving 4,000 people homeless. Wow.
Well, the most recent set of quakes started with a 5.5 magnitude, then just 2 hours later, a more powerful 6.1 magnitude aftershock. And to give you an idea of the strength of these quakes, Catan, they were reportedly felt like 60 miles away in Rome. So that's quite a distance there, and they felt them. Now, while rescue teams rushed to help families trapped by the quakes, electricity was out all over, and travel slowed as the huge boulders blocked some of the roadways, made them impassable.
I bet. Well, rescue teams were going street by street to evacuate elderly residents. However, darkness and heavy rains hindered rescue efforts. So far, reports indicate that at least 2 people are injured, while the mayor of the neighboring town called the scene apocalyptic.
Yeah. Well, the second set of earthquakes came just 3 weeks after Pope Francis paid a visit to the region. He arrived at Amatrius, the town that was hit by the 6.2 magnitude earthquake, catching many locals off guard. Now, according to the Associated Press, the pontiff wanted to keep his visit low-key, so it wasn't announced until after he had already arrived.
The Pope's main goal in visiting was to console survivors and urge them to press forward. After finishing in Amatria, the Pope went on to meet with the people of 2 more towns also struck by the quakes.
Well, Italy's infrastructure is not the only thing that is crumbling. Their banking situation is falling apart as well. Our correspondent Larry McGee has this story and a few other ones. Larry, what can you tell us about Italy's banking system?
Economic woes in Italy are beginning to make headlines due to a downturn in its banking system reportedly caused by default loans. The volume of non-performing loans said to be held by Italian banks is estimated at 360 billion euros, which is believed to be about a third of all defaulted debt at EU banks. In layman's terms, Italian lending institutions are having difficulty recovering both the money they have loaned and the usury they have attached to it. Attention is now shifting towards the leadership as people begin to question why it was exactly that no one was able to foresee this sort of a collapse, given the intention of banks to furnish loans to inexperienced entrepreneurs with the condition that they would purchase stocks in the banks. Retired bank branch manager Andrea Miserandino spoke with reporters on the matter and stated that during his time, all banks used to have a supervisory body to evaluate individuals' ability to repay loans. About 10 years ago, he said, those bodies were eliminated for no reason, but the Bank of Italy, which has the responsibility to monitor banks' conduct, did nothing about it. The retired manager says his fear is that certain big financial groups, the notorious ones, have orchestrated this all to make huge profits. Some of the immediate socio-economic consequences of the crisis has been severe cuts at two major banks, including the world's oldest, Monte dei Paschi, which intends to eliminate 2,500 jobs and close 500 branches. Other institutions are undergoing similar restructuring and efforts to survive. Efforts by Russia to liberate Mosul have survived so far. The intention of Moscow, in conjunction with Iraq and the U.S., is reportedly to prevent ISIS insurgents from fleeing from Mosul into Syria. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov announced the operation at a recent press conference, stating that for the mercenaries to move from the Iraqi city into Syria with their heavy arms would obviously worsen the situation in Syria, and Russia believes it is important not to let that happen. The comments came as the foreign minister sat amid his Iranian and Syrian counterparts. They all pledged to expand their collaboration and working to combat terrorism. Syrian Foreign Minister Walid al-Muhalim expressed suspicions of an agenda by the U.S. to relocate ISIS from Mosul to the mercenaries' de facto capital in Raqqa. The Syrian official contends that the U.S. is not combating the Syrian insurgents, but has designs rather to destroy Syria's infrastructure. For his part, the foreign diplomat for Iran believes that dismantling terrorism should be a global effort that will require political will and determination, something that Persia believes is currently lacking. Mr. Zarif holds that there needs to be a more decisive approach in fighting the global phenomenon of terrorism, and that the entire effort cannot be reduced to Syria alone. The Persian official called further yet for an all-out ceasefire in Syria to facilitate the distribution of humanitarian aid to civilians, and stated that only the Syrian people should decide the course for Syria, and that diplomacy is the only viable solution for the crisis. Yet another crisis appears to be manifesting in Iraq as thousands of refugees have begun fleeing the city of Mosul and surrounding areas due to government efforts to retake the city from ISIS insurgents. The operation is in its 11th day of its siege, and while Baghdad and its allies are labeling their efforts so far a success, there are conflicting reports alleging different circumstances on the ground. Certain analysts, in fact, are calling the U.S.-led coalition's offensive a disaster, and one that should have been foreseen, given the tendency towards disunity and infighting, which has characterized certain coalition members, such as the Turks and the Kurds, during previous operations. The Mosul operation has seen those same and similar tensions reignited, with the head of Turkey railing at the Prime Minister of Iraq, al-Abadi, that he was not his equal, and that the Iraqi head was not at his level, and that the Prime Minister shouting in Iraq was not important to Turkey at all, and that the Prime Minister of Iraq, al-Abadi, should know his place. Despite all of this, Defense Secretary Carter says everything is proceeding as planned, while Secretary of State John Kerry recently commented at a meeting in Chicago that the Euphrates is being torn apart by multiple wars that are robbing the region of peace and preventing the overthrow of President Assad. The secretary said there are many wars taking place simultaneously, all in the same place. The Kurds versus the Kurds versus Turkey, Iran versus Saudi Arabia, Iran and Hezbollah versus Israel and the U.S., many people versus Assad, the world versus ISIS, ISIS versus Assad and civilization, Shia versus Sunni, and Persian Shia versus Arab Sunni, just to name a few. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katan Jeff, back to you.
Well, as you can see, it's pretty hard to keep straight.
Yeah, and with all the countries fighting against one another, it's no wonder that we have so many wars taking place all over, and there is absolutely no peace anywhere you turn. Well, NATO is deploying thousands of troops to 3 northern European countries, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, known as the Baltic states. These countries border Poland and Russia. The troop deployment was announced by NATO's Secretary General Hans Stoltenberg at a defense ministers' meeting of the alliance in Brussels, Belgium.
Stoltenberg explained the deployment was in response to Russia's military buildup and increased activity around NATO's borders. Stoltenberg threatened the Kremlin by saying any attack on a member of NATO would be considered an attack on all member states. However, he added the alliance remains open to dialogue with Moscow. So you mess with any one of them, you're going to have to deal with all of us.
Yeah, so they're offering their hand out, but letting them know that, you know, there's also coming with the threat if you don't want to follow. Yeah, wow, that's interesting. Well, the U.S., along with its allies, Japan and South Korea, they've agreed to work together to increase pressure on North Korea to give up its nuclear weapons among increased tensions on the Korean Peninsula. The Japanese Vice Foreign Minister Shinseki Sugiyama said, "During our meeting, the South Korean Deputy Foreign Minister and the U.S. Deputy Secretary of State and I affirmed the necessity to increase pressure on North Korea and have it give up its nuclear and missile development, in order to realize the denuclearization of the peninsula." So, in effect, try to get rid of all nuclear weapons in that area.
The officials were speaking after a meeting in Tokyo. This meeting came after a statement made by the U.S. spy chief James Clapper said that the denuclearization of North Korea is a lost cause. Now, South Korea said that it will start talks with Japan on direct intelligence sharing on North Korea. Pyongyang carried out its 5th nuclear test in September and said it was a test that was necessary, part of their defense policy to counter U.S. threats and sanctions that have been recently, imposed or put on them and so forth.
Right. Well, as the fighting continues in the city of Mosul in Iraq, the humanitarian crisis is on a rise, and international organizations like the Red Cross has stated that it would like to establish dialogue with groups like ISIL in an attempt to spare civilians amid heavy fighting in the area. Well, the U.S. Secretary of Defense has said that he's impressed with how the fighting has been going on despite the humanitarian crisis in that area of Mosul.
Ashton Carter said concerning the fighting in Iraq, I definitely am encouraged by the results of our campaign so far. It has been proceeding as planned.
Despite all the deaths,
that's right.
It's impressive and proceeding as planned. Well, that's interesting. At a UN security session, a conflict between Russian and American ambassadors was underway. They were both accusing each other with failures in Aleppo, and this has been ongoing for some time, as we've reported in the past. Stephen O'Brien, the UN Undersecretary General, said Aleppo has essentially become a kill zone. Russian ambassador to the UN, Vitaly Churkin, stated that Russia has been doing its part to alleviate the plight of Aleppo citizens, and the eastern part of the city is being held hostage by rebel groups like al-Nusra. He also mentioned how the Russians had withheld sending any fighter jets to the area while stories of chemical weapons exploding overhead the civilians were being released. He also asked that the UN representative speak the truth concerning the matter.
Well, during that same meeting, when it came time for the Syrian ambassador to speak, the U.S. envoy, Samantha Powers, decided to get up and leave the room. Earlier, she also made the claim that the citizens of Aleppo were too frightened of Russia to leave the city when given the chance, saying that Russia encouraged civilians to leave through certain corridors, but they were too terrified to entrust their safety to the people who were bombing their cities.
Right. Well, Vitaly lashed back, saying that Powers distorted Russia's stance to the point of absurdity, and then criticizing her own absurd interpretations. He also said Russia offered to work with the U.S. to guard the roads so that civilians could safely leave Aleppo and see to it that humanitarian aid was gotten into the city, but the United States refused this offer. So, he said, how can you complain about military aid and say that we don't know what to do? Well, we've told you what to do. Allow both militaries to work together. But you said no. Let Russia take care of that and expose themselves to danger and the bullets of terrorists, not us. This is not fair, he concluded.
Well, the UN humanitarian chief spoke at a briefing on Syria and said that the effects of the Russian and Syrian bombardment of Aleppo were horrific and made clear that the deadlocked council needed to take action. Now, the council was supposed to discuss the chief's comments in private, but some asked to speak in public, including Vitaly Churkin, the president of the council. Now, Churkin also said that some of the comments by the UN officials were dishonest.
Vitaly addressed Mr. O'Brien's statements by saying if we needed to be preached to, we'd go to a church. What we expect at this meeting is an objective assessment. That really hasn't happened in your case. The tone of the world's high courts, now this is the world's high courts of diplomacy, have become unusually diplomatic. Vitaly also attacked the U.S. Ambassador Samantha Powers, who also condemned Russia. And Churkin, after the meeting, said that the attacks on his country were factually wrong and outrageous. So it seems like a lot of the different nations were coming against Russia in regards to Aleppo and Syria, but Churkin was willing to stand his ground and fight back, so to speak.
There's always so much disagreement, you know, even with, you'd think they could get the facts and be able to work something out, but they always disagree.
Yeah, so with the leaders not being able to see a solution of peace, well, it's no wonder why the citizens don't have the same thing.
Right.
Well, with sickness and disease, earthquakes, and nonstop warring among the nations, is it any wonder that we haven't already destroyed ourselves with nuclear wars? Well, the nations are on their way to total destruction with no way out on their current course. But for you who want a better life, well, the House of Yahweh is the answer. Yisrael Hawkins and the House of Yahweh has been teaching the solution of peace for over 50 years. Now, all we need is willing students who are willing to learn and apply that solution. Well, if you're interested in changing your life and the world, contact the House of Yahweh. And when you do, don't forget to request your free copy of the monthly newsletter and the Prophetic Word magazine.
To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites, www.yahweh.com, www.yisraelhawkins.com, or www.yahwehsbranch.com. You can also visit our website at www.ypnnews.com. For any emails, you can email them at info@yahweh.com. And for any international calls, you can please call the number on your screen now. And once again, we'd like to remind you about the Yisrael Says program. If you haven't already checked out this excellent Bible study program, go to www.yisraelsays.com and just find out how easy it is to get the scriptural answers that you've been looking for.
Well, don't go anywhere. Up next, Yisrael Hawkins, the one who is authorized to bring forth the solution of peace. For all of us here at YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
Thank you for watching.